Welcome back to another episode of Circling the Nest. That's your cold open. Another weekly Seattle Seahawks show here on Circling Seattle Sports. Of course, the soldier himself, Jake Parr, doing all of these things while I spout all of this nonsense. Um, I guess it'd probably be a shorter episode just because it's that I think we've talked about it over the last two episodes, Jake. This is the time of the year where not too much happens. I
Everybody's
mean,
very
even
sleepy. There is no news.
yeah, it's nap time, and I need my blankie. Even in some of the stuff, like the main thing was the Klint Kubiak presser with the Seahawks, where he was officially introduced. Um, and even then, like some of the things that that could be coming up, like a Tyler Lockett decision. Mike McDonald basically said, "Oh, we'll come to that decision when it happens," and which is like in March. And I'm like, "Oh, great." There was also the timeline for when Uchenna Nwosu's like essentially a decision to be made on Uchenna Nwosu was coming up, and then from the reporting, Brady Henderson on of ESPN basically shared that um, they were able to push that back. And I was like, oh well, so they're playing around with that. Um, so that I mean, it's we talked about it last week when we messed around with the salary cap machine. Um, but I mean, these are still important decisions that Seattle has to make. John Schneider, I think, was on the radio this past week, and he basically kind of um, downplayed the cap situation. He, in a sarcastic tone, he said, "Oh, it was doomsday," and I'm like, "Yeah, sure." I mean,
It
John,
is a
as
little
long
bit
as
of
you
doomsday.
work your way out of it, then sure, right? He said we have a plan to address everything. I hope you do. I mean, it's pretty
Better than
important.
having concepts of a plan.
God, I forgot about that. Jesus, it's just, it's we're still in winter. Brittany was texting me. She was like midwinter break. I was like, oh yeah, that's still happening.
In the bleak
Um,
midwinter.
that damn rodent. Um, yeah. He seemed to be, conveying that the situation wasn't as dire as it appears, and I'm like, okay. I mean, as long as you work your way out of it. Um, he was kind of asked about, address the off season. He said, "We know exactly what our deficiencies are. We can all see it," which I hope means the offensive line. We have a plan to address everything, is where that original quote came from that I mentioned, mentioning that they need to be better at developing players and not just finding them, which
That's
my
true.
mind goes right to Christian Haynes, right, who they drafted in the second round at an offensive guard. Um, yes. I guess I'm so used to saying offensive tackle that offensive guards sound repulsive to me. God. I was like, that's not right. I'm just used to tackles. It's the human resources meme again, offensive tackles and offensive.
Yeah.
Except John Schneider would be oh no. Um he mentioned Philadelphia as a team that succeeded at both you know, developing and finding them, which yeah, I mean, with the way that the Eagles have built their offensive line. So there's that. And then oh yes, what I originally looked for on the Nuosu, his um if he's still on the roster by February 14th, which has happened, the $6 million of his base $6 million of his base salary was guaranteed for injury only. It was supposed to become fully guaranteed. That was supposed to be the original trigger date was the 14th, but it seems like that's been pushed back. So there's nothing imminent on Nuosu, and it seems like they might be trying to uh, figure that out on a
Yeah.
maybe a restructured deal. So it sounds like Uchenna will be back. Well, we'll still be here in 2025, just perhaps on a restructured deal. So that's that. Let's get to the Kubiak. Let's get to the
The
Kubiak presser.
Coob.
Um, I don't know, Jake. Like as much as a presser can be interesting, outside of whatever Liam Cohen and the Jacksonville Jaguars did with Duval. Outside of that, like you can only take so much usually from a podcast. Us,
Wow. You
from
can take
a
anything
press
you want from
conference.
us.
What?
What?
What? Um, but I don't know. There were some interesting things like how uh you know. Kubiak was asked about Geno Smith, and he said that Geno was one of the reasons that he wanted to come to Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So he knows some
he
ball.
he does know some ball. Talked about getting DK Metcalf the ball in different situations so that they could, essentially, take advantage of that athleticism, which we'll talk about DK later. Um, I don't know. What did you think about this? Because, again, there's only so much you can take from an offensive coordinator. Um, an introductory press conference, and especially when like the big deal for this offense is that offensive line. And it seems like they're doing a lot coaching wise to kind of improve upon that and do better at, retooling the run game, before even looking at like free agency and the player wise. Like the coaching staff wise, they're doing a lot, staff in staff terms to kind of improve that run game, which again seems to be such a big deal for
Mm-hmm.
Mike McDonald. I don't know. What did you think about that, and anything that he might have said, like making it pretty clear that it seems like Geno Smith will be here next year, and even Mike McDonald was on a show with Fox, and he said he seemed confused that there was any notion that Geno Smith wouldn't be here next year.
Yeah, I mean, I did. That is good news for me. Like we were talking about, kind of right after the season ended, that Geno was like not the problem with the team at all. So it's good to see that being reflected in the coaching staff, to be them kind of be standing behind their guy, because like, yeah, he is great at football. No matter what Twitter brain has to say. I think if I hear the term balanced team one more time, I'm going to rip my ears off, because, like, as a buzzword, it has become totally meaningless. Because, yeah, you have to be able to run and pass the ball. Like, that is not, some magical new wisdom that we have developed. That is ancient football being developed, or being brought to us from our forefathers. We know that you have to be a balanced team. You can stop saying it now. I'm interested in seeing how they're going to address the run game, because, like, what kinds of runs are we going to start pulling? Like Kubiak talked a little bit about this, that starting like out as like an outside zone team,
Oh, okay.
and then like doing different kinds of runs later to see like where our roster's like best at, which that feels to me a little bit like giving away the game before the season. Like, yes, we are going to outside run early in the season, so like, the first three teams on the schedule can just go, okay, we'll prep the outside run then. Um, so seems silly to say that out loud.
Secure
Yeah,
the edge.
seems a little bit silly to go out there and just say that. But yeah, I mean, so I'm hoping that turns out all right. It's going to be, I'm sure it's going to develop a lot of interesting takes based on like Cam and stuff like that. Kind of before the season. Oh, what kind of runs are they working on? Oh, who do they have doing this, and who do they have doing that? And I'm sure that's going to be great for cell phone videos being recorded by somebody who's starving to death and hankering for football footage.
God.
I think the really interesting thing is when Kubiak talked about fullbacks.
Yes.
That he wants to use a fullback. And to me, as has been previously stated on this podcast, I love me a big boy. I love me a big old football boy. So the idea of like the Seahawks running a fullback in the Big 25, I'm a huge fan of that.
So they need to call Nick Ballore back, or you want a more traditional fullback?
Well, I think he talked about using tight ends as fullbacks, which I think it's probably your best bet. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I want to be defensive lineman and see Noah Fant or Jake Bobo charging at me.
Oh my God.
Get trucked over by that. That sounds fun to me, Let's go. Let's use a fullback.
Is this sicko ball?
I'm a firm believer in sicko ball.
If fullbacks in the Big 2025, is this sicko ball?
Yeah. If we have to use sicko ball to win the West, I'm all for it. So yeah, I mean, that to me is the most interesting thing. The other stuff is just kind of generic presser I don't want to say weasel words, but weasel words. You'll
Well,
have to
yeah.
forgive me, by the way. I'm not sick, but I do have like a monster of a sore throat in case I sound funny this week.
No, you're fine. I mean, you haven't cracked any jokes yet. Um,
I could never tell a joke. I'm the least funny.
that's a good point with the fullbacks. I mean, I was like, paying attention to this while I think I was doing something while this was happening, and I saw fullback, and I was like, what? Because like I don't know if you've ever, played the Madden games where you do the dynasty or whatever and you can
Hmm.
draft and then like you look if you ever sort by position in the draft as fullbacks, and it's like three dudes. Um
Yeah,
it's
like
just
75
so
overalls.
I don't know who the hell like yeah, I imagine it will be tight end wise. Like you give like a Brady Russell, a guy who hardly will like get tight end snaps, but really doesn't do much. Give him an opportunity, I don't know, to
Hmm.
contribute, whether that is, run blocking or if they send him out into the flat or something. Um, but yeah, I think it all like you kind of said with the weasel words, like this press conference was largely just, you know, with the coach or the new coach, you talk about the players that are on the roster and that are safe, essentially,
Hmm.
right? You talk about Gino, who's got a decent contract. Like naturally, that makes sense, and especially with Mike McDonald's comments, and right after the Super Bowl, right, where Philly like tortured, they put Patrick Mahomes in a torture chamber, nightmare. Um, like the Seahawks post is like 2025 season up next, and it was a photo, and it was like Geno specifically centered. I'm like,
Hmm.
if you read into everything with obviously what Mike said, but that as well, like there's confidence he'll be back. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna put all of the other thoughts of that to rest. If you want to look for a new quarterback, be a fan of the Steelers, who are apparently calling the Jaguars on Trevor Lawrence, which I'm fascinated by. And who also don't want Russell Wilson or uh Justin Fields back. They're fascinating. I we could be a much different show if we were a Steelers show. Um, and I'd
Just
be a
we just be
Yinzer.
screaming.
But yeah, I think the biggest thing was kind of the emphasis and the belief in the players here and kind of the run. Like I think we mentioned it last week, Jake, the different like John Benton and Janico, right? The new quarterbacks coach. One of the things that Kubiak mentioned was if our identity is going to be running a football, be a running football team, it starts with offensive line coach John Benton. So obviously that mattered that they
Hmm.
brought him in. You talk about uh being in 21 and 12 personnel, plans on using a fullback and like you mentioned, using tight ends to do so likely. Yeah, you look at the pin and pull for the outside zones. Um, yeah, Mike McDonald basically said we're working through that with Tyler Lockett right now. I don't know. If you want to be an optimist, that sounds like, hey, they could restructure his deal.
Yeah. That
But
sounds
that
like
also is kind of weasel word, right?
working through it. It's like,
Going through yeah, it's kind of a non-answer, you know. But I don't know. It was interesting just reading the quotes how much like faith that Kubiak has in Gino, talking about his toughness, talking about how he's a guy who wins football games in the fourth quarter. Well, he would have loved Pete Carroll, huh?
yeah.
Like
I mean, but
obviously
that's
that
something we talked about like early in the year, or early in the show rather, late in the year, was how many times the Seahawks had pushed back in the
um
fourth quarter for even a lot of the really disgusting losses that were bad in like the second and the third quarter.
yeah.
They were good at putting up garbage time numbers uh, and making them look less bad in the box score.
Yeah, you don't want to have to be in that position in the first place, right?
Exactly. But that is definitely one of Gino's strong suits. I mean, he's got how many game-winning drives in the fourth quarter now, right? So I'm glad to see that being highlighted as like a feature of his game because it really is, and I think a lot of people kind of forgot that when we were getting run over by Buffalo, for example.
Ugh, gosh. I keep kind of forgetting that game happened. Yeah.
I'm sorry to keep reminding you of it then.
The voices are getting louder. Yeah, and I mean all of what was said with Mike and with Clint here. I'm sorry, I think of like Clinton Barton when I say that name. Clint's not a very common name.
Not
Um,
not in Big 25. It isn't. No,
no, neither are fullbacks, but here we are. Um,
I believe
you
in
know,
fullbacks.
the fullback propaganda starts now.
Ooh,
Bijan Robinson, Will Tukuafu, Nick Ballore.
bring me my big boys.
Hey, maybe I don't know if he's still playing anymore. See if Mike has any connections in Baltimore. Get Patrick Ricard out here. Nope, he's still with the Ravens. Hey, call him.
Jean-Luc Picard.
Wow, that's wow. I don't know. Like none of this is confusing to me. The talk about whether it was Mike or Clint talking about wanting to run the ball better, the outside stuff, sort of stuff that the Shanahan family essentially has gotten a lot of success with in the past. Obviously run the football better. It takes some pressure off your quarterback. Ideally, if you're in the football better, you're not in these late game situations, right, where you need to go high tempo, whether it is
Mm-hmm.
putting up points or you throw a crucial interception when the other team ideally has like 8 defensive backs on the field and they
Yeah,
know you're passing, right? Like none of this is surprising to me. It just is kind of interesting to see so much doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on Geno Smith, and talking about working within the personnel. I think it's clear. I don't think like some organizations, the issue is clear, but the front office and the franchise seem to be oblivious to whatever is happening. Like I think the team knows they need to address the offensive line. They know they need to be able to run the football better. Um, and it seems like they're taking the necessary precautions. How it plays out ultimately, we'll have to see in September and October, right, as the season gets going. Um, but nice to see that. And interesting to see, like when we talked about our offensive coordinator thoughts before they hired Kubiak, right? Like the reporting seems to be that Mike had Kubiak on the top of his list from the time that they fired Grubb, but they still went through the extensive search process. They went through like what 5 weeks or so or something like that. And what I read,
3 weeks.
3 weeks. They went through
Felt
that in
like
a
a year though.
bunch of different. It did a bunch of different interviews. Like they did their homework essentially. So interesting to see on that. So we'll
Hopefully,
stop.
they came to the right answer. You know.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it doesn't want to be like a. I don't know. I don't think Grub was that bad, but you want to make sure,
Exactly.
especially when it seems like you really do want to be winning, um, and you want to take advantage of Geno Smith's window, right? Because he's not getting
Mm-hmm.
any younger. He doesn't have Benjamin Button disease. Um, you have a roster that I do think can win right now, right?
Yeah.
And I wouldn't want to push that back, especially when it seems like the other teams in your division are taking steps back, right? Like there's rumors about Matthew Stafford. The Rams want to trade Cooper Cup. They've so got a good team over there, but they're moving some important figures in that franchise. The 49ers collapsed last year, right? The
That was funny.
Cardinals are the Cardinals. Like, so I mean, you want to take advantage of that when you can. So, talking about players that will help you win right now. I know we've talked about him before, Jake, but especially
Mm-hmm.
with um, I talked about Cooper Cup being listed. Apparently, Debo Samuel wants a trade again, make it 2 years in a row. Um, out of San Francisco, DK Metcalf's name will get brought up because he is a player because of his ability and because of his contract that people will float as a potential for a trade.
Mm-hmm.
And also talking about it because it's a quiet week in the NFL, or at least with the Seahawks.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. Where do you stand with it, especially considering the fact that, um, you've got a new offensive coordinator who will probably want to play with the shiny toy that is DK Metcalf and the ability that he has, as one of the league's ideally premier wide receivers. You talked about it at length and you've written about it with him and kind of having a quieter year per
Mm-hmm.
se. And just with what's available, I mean, you could probably see what a Cup will draw in a trade if they do in fact move him. He's posted about like being put on the trade block, so I feel like it's going to happen. It'd be really awkward to be like, "Hey, we're putting you on the trade block," and then, "Hey, buddy, welcome back to training camp." Kind of
Woo!
like the thing that
We've
happened
always
with,
had full faith in you.
yeah, and then Debo Samuel. I mean, that one little less just because he's kind of wanted the hell out of Santa Clara the last what few years.
Yeah.
And that was made publicly known. So I don't know. Where are you at right now with the idea of moving DK, and especially um, considering the other wideouts in your own division that are available right now?
hmm I mean, I think it's as high as I am on Gino. I'm probably like low on DK.
Mm,
Because last year was just not fun to watch. And I mean, when it felt a lot of the times like Gino and DK weren't kind of synced up mentally.
right. Yeah.
It's felt like DK came off his route a little bit, like he wasn't precisely where he should have been for where some throws went. A couple fumbles that were really not good, and it felt like it just his. I don't know. There was something about his game that wasn't working. Of course, he was missing. He missed a ton of games with injuries.
Yeah.
But I think ideally we. It sounds like they're going to use DK this year, pretty heavily from the press conference. I think you bring him out this year, and like, do you hope that he makes a really good showing early in the season and that you can trade him before the deadline? That might be your best because he's got to have a huge calorie salary cap.
I mean, he's a big man.
He's a big man, but he's going to have a huge cap hit this year.
Yeah.
So I do think, and like when your cap is kind of your biggest problem, although it's nowhere near as dire as it seems apparently, it still is pretty dire. um, so like it's tough, right? Especially when you have such a strong receiving core that the Seahawks have. I almost said Mariners. Um, Pitchers and catchers reported. I got baseball in the brain.
Nah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think you hope DK has like a good start and that you trade him, especially like you said, you see what kind of deal that the other teams in your division are getting. I don't think you're going to get any of those yourself because they'd be insane to trade to you
Yeah.
as a divisional rival and as like probably the team that's most likely to win the NFC West next year. I mean, knock on all the wood you can find, right? But a team that came very close to it last year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, DK really is kind of the tough one, right? Because I think you just got to hope that he's got one more DK year in him. And then he becomes, a dried up husk of a football player.
Yeah. I mean, I'm I get this discourse, right? I understand. I'm not saying any of what you're saying outlandish. You're not speaking gibberish to me, right? Now you're just like Simlish.
Flargal Narf.
I don't know. I just in any sport, if I'm a general manager, you put me in the big boy chair, right? Like it's really tough for me to want to move a player that is still relatively young. Let me see his birthday. He's 27. Um, and has the physical ability that he does. Um, when you know what's possible, it's tough for me to move something, right? When I see someone who's kind of peaked out and I know what you're gonna give me, and I know it's like it's seeming unlikely you're gonna go any higher than what we've seen already, right? Then I'm like, okay, I can understand moving that piece. I like internally I see what you can do. Another team might have higher hopes for you and think might be fun to fix, right? Like I'm just not there with DK. Um, and I mean, unless he wants out, I mean, if he wants out, then I entertain the idea. But I don't think that's a thing. I do
Yeah.
hear you with what you're saying. Like I think of the dude, what game was it? The Minnesota game where he kind of tailed off on his route.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the one I was thinking of.
like I hear you on that for sure. I don't know what it was this year.
hmm
With Gino at least, obviously you look at the stats production, he missed a few games after the Atlanta game with that injury. Um, so I don't know. And especially if you're going to lose a Tyler Lockett, yeah, obviously again, like it
Working
seems
through
like
it.
it's trending that way, but
Yeah.
want to be an optimist, right? Like DK Metcalf's importance is higher there because okay,
hmm
you lose Tyler Lockett whether it's the off season or in season, unless you're bringing in someone or you draft someone, you're one. JSN, which again, really excited to see what JSN does after, a breakout year of sorts here in year two, right? Um, and then what, right? Because like
Yeah.
Jacob was fine, but I don't know if he is built out to be a two or a three, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he is. He could prove me wrong. And then it's like, I don't know who the hell is in NFL free agency. You got to look at that. But are you going to? You already need to spend money at offensive line. Are you going to allocate some of those resources to wideout? Oh, Stephon Diggs, Jesus Christ! I mean, there are some two top guys in there, and Stephon Diggs and T Higgins, and then you're going to kind of get older, and Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, Brandon Cooks. Oh God, all of these is just generally. Oh, so a lot of the top free agents are wide receivers currently. Oh Jesus.
Hmm.
I mean, but are you spending that sort of money to get a guy like that when you don't know what he can produce, and you've
Yeah.
already got DK Metcalf in half, and in half? Don't cut him in half. One hole, please.
One DK.
You
I mean,
know,
yeah, and I
you
think
see what I'm
yeah,
saying? Like,
I do see what you're
it's like,
saying, and I think I am underselling DK's value, like as a leader, like in the receiving
there's that
core,
as
with kind
well.
of his experience, with whoever does come in. Like if we do lose Tyler Lockett, whoever comes in to fill his role, probably like a low draft pick.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
I think DK is kind of the guy that you want in the locker room, kind of bringing that receiving core together. Um, I do see this being his last year as a Seahawk, though. 25.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like if you're able to get some like strong value and you're not getting, I don't know, fleeced in a trade, or you're just having to give something up because you want to get rid of the guy, like
Hmm.
if you're just getting rid of him to get rid of him, I have a problem with that. Right.
Yeah,
But I mean, if you get
absolutely.
something that will make this football team better, and ultimately is something that you have to do to take the next step forward in contending, then I understand, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to talk about until either they restructure his deal or do make it clear that they want to move him. I will kind of ignore it, because like there hasn't been any substantial like, oh, DK Metcalf wants out or this and that. Like I think it was Ian Rappaport tweeted after the trade deadline. It was like DK Metcalf didn't move. And like, yeah, I don't remember any of the local guys reporting that he was anyway. So
Yeah.
we kind of talk about with low draft picks, with the wide receiver, like the Seahawks do have kind of a middling pick, right?
Hmm.
At 18. Could change from now until when we get to the draft. They could trade up, which I kind of doubt. They could move someone to get a pick in the first, but anything's possible. Um, how are you if you're John, and I'm putting you in John Schneider's boots here, or whatever. I'm thinking this
Hmm.
photo, I think after the Super Bowl where he's got the WWE title belt around him
Yeah,
for
yeah,
the
yeah. I'm placing
uh
myself in the mind in the headspace.
yeah, let you get in there.
Hmm.
Like, how are you approaching that first round pick? Because, there's the just draft the best player available ideology, which I know has kind of been talked about recently with Howie Roseman and the Eagles. Um, but you obviously have needs at the interior line. So like,
Yeah.
how are you attacking that? Because, there are like some mocks do have you taking an inside guy, or do you go like with an edge? I mean, if an edge is available, like we've talked of for years, pass rush has kind of been in the discussion. We did our positional breakdown with the pass rush, and you've got talent there. You've got young talent there. You've got some veteran guys who didn't exactly produce as much as you would like to, especially for their contracts last season. How do you approach it? Because it feels like they could go a few different ways with this year's draft, and obviously, some of those picks depend on what the teams ahead of you do.
Hmm. I mean, it feels because like it feels strange to want to take an like a lineman in the first round. Um, just like emotionally, I'm not sure how to feel about that, but it probably is your best bet because like it's your most glaring need, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel that gap? Like this is. We also do have to start thinking about the quarterback after Geno Smith. Um, like it's not Sam Howell. Can't be Sam Howell. Um, so do we look at that? Do we take like whatever best quarterback is left by the time you get to 18 and like put him under Geno's wing for a year. Um, that's got an interesting history in the history of the NFL doing that with
Mm.
your fresh draft picks. Um, and then, like you said, there's the draft the best player available thing, which like could be good for the Seahawks because besides the line issues, most of the like cores are basically fine.
Yeah.
Um, so do you just like take whoever's best and just kind of iterate, and be 15% better than you were last year? Because that gets you into the playoffs, I think. Um,
What percentage is that, Jake?
15.
Is there a five and a four somewhere?
45% better, 54%
Oh,
better. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, we're not doing Jerry speak today. That's
no
for
Jero speak.
that's
Yeah,
for the next podcast.
I think it's interesting with this pick because like if you were a top 10, I think the talk changes because then it feels like there are some guys up there who could make some real impact.
Yeah.
I'm not super like draft heavy guy. Like I have no idea who some of these guys are. Um, you're not getting one of the top few quarterbacks at this round. Like, and even then, I have some questions about the quarterbacks in this draft. I don't feel purely decision making wise. I don't feel too great about Shadur Sanders. Like, I don't think he'll go number one. Cam Ward's fun. I mean, like he seems like he's pretty solid, but how polished is his game? Abdul Carter is a great edge out of Penn State, but he's probably going top three. So, you won't
Hmm.
sniff him. Um, and then I think, going back to Seattle's pick and recentering here, like I feel as though, because we obviously have to go through the combine still, right? And all that sort of thing. If there's someone
Hmm.
who really explodes at you that will be available, offensive line wise, that tests really well and that performs well and had good tape, and you feel confident in him, then take an offensive lineman. Like, do it. Like,
Yeah.
but if it's more of a question mark, or you're not as sure, and we can get better somewhere else, like you said, with even a good amount of the notable positions already kind of stocked up, like and get better. So and then there's also the like free agency, right? Because free agency comes first in the NFL, if I'm correct.
I,
Um,
I think so.
so like And I know there are some offensive guards that are going to become available potentially that, if Seattle does want to, Jerry Maguire show me the money, then, then obviously that sort of lessens the need there. Um, so I think it depends. And there's still hoops that we have to jump through before we get to that with the combine and with free agency, right?
Yeah.
But then there's also before any of that, there's the cap situation that is well Johnny Boy has to get through. You know, so I don't know. It's interesting to look at, but I think like best available wouldn't be the end of the world. You
Hmm.
know. Yeah.
I'm
That's
looking up
that's
these mock drafts. Some of them are crazy, by the way. Um,
like in terms of generally or who Seattle's taking.
with Seattle's taking like this one has us taking a pass rusher round one,
Okay.
which is real. That's real sicko headed, I think.
Take a full background one.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
Oh well, this one like
Dan Parr,
safety
no, oh,
is
safety's funny.
you see what I'm saying? Like Julian
Yeah,
Love, Coby Bryant. Like I don't know if I'm going safety. A tight end is fascinating. Like when you already have Noah Fant under contract, you've got AJ Barner's emergence. Like I don't know if I'm going tight end with my first round pick. I feel like there are better things that you can do with that. Like I'm seeing a lot of offensive line, and that makes sense. Even some D line makes sense. Um, but tight end and safety are definitely ones that like. even an edge rusher makes more sense to me than a tight end or a safety in
Mm-hmm.
this situation. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if it's a guy that like Mike McDonald really loves and they can use like a Kyle Hamilton, how he did in Baltimore, then sure, maybe I can understand it. And you get him on obviously a rookie contract, which will be cheaper than some of the other guys that you have. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything? Did anything pique your interest while I was yapping before we wrap up here?
One of the mock drafts, Dan Parr, no relation. As,
Allegedly.
allegedly, I don't know. I haven't looked into it. As the Seahawks taking Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas, which that is like not terrible as an offensive guard. He's a fun guy.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of
I
Texas games because hook 'em. So I wouldn't be opposed to that. That'd be fun. Always should use more former Longhorns in the Seahawks.
Wow.
Watch us get like Quinn Ewers round 2.
Oh Jesus.
I
Too
don't.
much burnt orange.
I could not. I don't want to watch any more Quinn ball.
Quinn Ball. Well, if this is anything, is this anything? In the article about Kelvin Banks Jr. declaring, called him one of the most decorated linemen in Longhorns history, and was apparently Mel Kiper's top-rated tackle in this year's draft, and was projected as a number 10 pick on his most recent big board. So that's a big boy, and he's an All-American. Wow. So I don't know. I could look into some burnt orange, but
There you go.
anyway, that will wrap it up unless something happens between now and when we post this, which, it happened with Kubiak, so I won't put it out of the realm of possibility. So yeah, I don't know. It might be some more weeks like this, but until we see you next time, take care of yourselves, be well, do whatever you can to make today a great day.
Hello there, everybody. Charles Hamaker here with Circling Seattle Sports. I'm joined by Jen Barnes of Rough and Tumble that we happen to be at right now.
Yeah.
Jen, why don't you talk to me a little bit about what we're announcing today, which is our partnership.
I'm so excited about this. First of all, I just want to say thank you. I think all of us here at Rough and Tumble are big fans of what you and your team at Circling Seattle Sports does. And so, I know you know this, but when you came to me with this idea, it just seemed pretty natural. And it's not just me. I think a lot of people in the sports community in Seattle also really respect you and your team. So it's exciting to kind of see these two things melding together, and we're really excited to start implementing some of the things and then hopefully seeing you guys a little bit more often.
Yeah, and so with what Jen says about seeing us more often, we've got a few things in the works, but you'll see watch parties here. We'd like to do a few different of our community drives, which you'll hear about here in a little bit. From now, we've got to make our announcements one at a time. I can't drop everything.
Not everything
right.
all at once.
But this has been a home for a lot of our team, whether it's myself, our friend, our photographer Liz is behind the camera. Liz is here often, so our team has kind of adopted this place kind of like our own since I saw you at our soft launch. So, it's been great to have that support. And in a lot of ways, and part of the reason I wanted to do this was the Rough and Tumble embodies a lot of what Circling Seattle Sports wants to do. Obviously with women's sports, with the storm and the rain, but just being, having the game on, every game on.
Yep.
How much of that, did you see align kind of even before this idea was mentioned when I first met you?
I think it's always felt like that. I mean, you and your team were here on opening night, and you just feel like you're part of the space, so it felt like really natural. And the fact that you actually cover all of the sports really makes your group stand out. So you are always covering all the rain games, all the storm games. UW women's softball, UW women's basketball, UW women's hockey. We love it. So all of those things, and obviously passionate M's fans, passionate Hawks fans, and passionate Kraken and Sounders fans. So really, from our perspective, those two things meshed really well.
So, you heard it from Jen herself, but this will be our home for all of these events, whether it's you can't make it to these games at home, we're always going to direct you to Rough and Tumble, and obviously the games on the road as well. All these, we're talking about the rain, they've got their schedule out finally, but this will be our home for that.
Great.
The storm games on the road, this is our home.
Yeah.
for all intents and purposes.
I love it.
And when I mentioned it to Jen when I first had this idea come up, I had this idea come up wearing a pink wig.
Yes, you did.
Ahead of Megan Rapinoe's final regular season home game for the Reign this past year.
Yeah.
I told her it's because I wanted this to feel genuine.
Yep.
I wanted a connection to feel genuine, and it does. So
Yeah.
that's what this is. Rough and Tumble is the home of Circling Seattle Sports, and I'm so excited to finally announce this partnership.
I can't wait.